Every single American soldier who stormed a beach, jumped from a plane, or held a line in the freezing forests of Belgium was carrying a piece of engineering that took decades to perfect and only one war to prove. This is the complete arsenal that won World War II. Every rifle, every pistol, every mortar, and every blade that put American steel into the fight. And by the end of this list, you will understand why the enemy never quite figured out how to match it, and why so many of these exact weapons are now selling for serious money at auction houses across the country. Let's start with the sidearms, because before we get to the rifles that decided battles, we need to talk about the pistols and revolvers that rode on the hip of nearly every American service member. The Colt M1911 A1 is the gun that needs no introduction. Chambered in .45A CP, built by Colt, but also by Ithaca, Remington Rand, Union Switch and Signal, and even the Singer Sewing Machine Company, nearly 1.9 million of these were manufactured during the war alone. It had been in American service since 1911, and by the time the Second World War broke out, the design was already considered untouchable. Simple, heavy-hitting, and dead reliable. A standard wartime 1911. A1 in shooter-grade condition today runs $900 to $1,500, but the manufacturer matters enormously. A documented Singer 1911. A1, one of only about 500 ever produced because a sewing machine company had no business making combat pistols and only did it briefly before Remington Rand took over full production, can bring $50,000 to $100,000 at auction, depending on condition and paperwork. Right alongside it rode the Smith & Wesson Victory Model, a .38 special revolver named for the V for Victory War Bond campaign stamped right into its history. Over 250,000 were built for air crews, naval personnel, and rear echelon security forces who needed a sidearm but were never going to be the ones kicking in a door. Clean original Victory models with correct lanyard rings and military markings sell for $500 to $900 today, with documented Navy or Army Air Corps examples pushing higher. Then there's the Colt M1917 revolver, a First World War design pulled back into service when 1911 production couldn't keep pace with demand. It fired .45 ACP through half-moon clips, and roughly 188,000 of them sat refurbished in armories, ready to be handed to military police, tank crews, and artillery batteries. Original condition examples with correct World War II era refinish bring $1,200 to $2,000 at auction now. And then you have two of the strangest sidearms this country has ever fielded. The high standard HDM was a suppressed .22 caliber pistol built exclusively for the Office of Strategic Services. It was demonstrated in the Oval Office, fired into a sandbag while President Roosevelt sat in the room, and he reportedly didn't even notice the shot. This was not a combat pistol. This was a tool for one job and one job only: quiet elimination, where silence mattered more than stopping power. Because so few were produced and documented, OSS provenance is nearly impossible to verify. Confirmed examples have sold in the $8,000 to $15,000 range, and a piece with airtight OSS paperwork would go considerably higher. And then there's the FP45 Liberator, a single-shot .45 caliber pistol stamped out of sheet metal in about 11 seconds per unit for a total wartime cost of $2.10 each. Over 1 million were built in 1942 and airdropped across occupied Europe and the Pacific, meant to arm resistance fighters with just enough firepower to take a rifle off a dead enemy soldier. Most were never actually distributed and were destroyed after the war, which is exactly why a complete original Liberator with its cardboard packaging and comic strip style instruction sheet now brings $2,000 to $4,000, an almost unbelievable return on a $2 wartime pistol. Now let's move to the submachine guns, because close quarters combat in this war belonged to a handful of weapons that could put out serious volume in a hurry. And this is also where transferable full auto values get genuinely staggering. The Thompson M1928A1 is the gun most people picture first: the top folding rear sight, the cuts compensator, the reputation built on Prohibition-era headlines long before it ever saw a battlefield. At $209 per unit, it was expensive, But in close range fighting with .45 ACP, it was devastating. Over 1.5 million were produced across every variant. A transferable, fully registered original Thompson today is a 5-figure firearm with clean examples bringing $25,000 to $40,000 in pristine documented guns, going well beyond that. As the war ground on, the simplified Thompson M1A1 arrived, stripped of the compensator, the drum magazine, and the top cocking handle, with production costs slashed from $209 down to $45. Transferable M1A1S trade in a similar range to the M1928A1, typically $20,000 to $35,000 depending on configuration and documentation. Then there's the M3, better known as the grease gun, stamped out of sheet steel by General Motors' guide lamp division and looking more like a plumbing tool than a weapon. Around 650,000 were built for tank crews and paratroopers who needed compact firepower without the price tag of a Thompson. And because it never carried the Thompson's cultural cachet, its transferable examples today are actually the bargain of the submachine gun category, running $12,000 to $18,000. And finally, there's a submachine gun most people have never heard of, the rising M50 and M55, the Marine Corps' emergency stopgap when Thompson production couldn't keep up with demand. In the mud and humidity of Guadalcanal, it was a disaster, corroding, jamming, and refusing to interchange parts between individual guns. Around 120,000 were built, and the Marine Corps pulled it from frontline service by 1943. Precisely because so few survived in original condition and collectors chased the Guadalcanal Association, a documented raising in good original shape now brings $3,000 to $5,000. Respectable money for a gun the Marines themselves wanted nothing to do with. Now for the rifles and carbines, the weapons that actually decided infantry engagements, and where you'll find some of the widest price spreads on this entire list. The M1 Garand sits at the top for a reason. 8 rounds, semi-automatic, no bolt to manually cycle, while every major enemy force on the planet was still working a bolt action by hand. General Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised, and with over 4 million produced, the numbers backed up the praise. A standard CMP service grade. Garand today runs $1,000 to $1,200. Correct collector grade examples with matching parts bring $3,000 to $8,000. And the rarest documented presentation pieces have crossed 6 figures at major auction. Right below it in sheer production volume was the M1 carbine, the most widely manufactured American firearm of the entire war at over 6 million units. Standard shooter-grade carbines sell for $900 to $1,400 today, with early war Inland and Winchester manufactured examples bringing a solid premium. A folding stock variant, the M1A1 paratrooper carbine, collapsed down to just over 25 inches so it could be strapped to a jumper's chest, and paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne hit French soil on D-Day with this exact weapon ready to fire before their boots even settled. Original wartime M1A1 paratrooper models, not the later reproductions, command $3,000 to $5,000 because the folding stock hardware is so frequently faked or replaced. Then there's the M1903 Springfield, a bolt-action design from the First World War, still fighting a generation later. 5 rounds, manually cycled, chambered in .30-06, slower than the Garand, but stone reliable, with over 1.3 million serving across both wars. Standard World War I dated examples with matching numbers bring $1,500 to $2,500 today. A sniper variant, the M1903A4, stripped the iron sights and mounted a Weaver or M73 B1 scope, and it served as America's primary long-range rifle from North Africa all the way to Okinawa without ever needing a redesign, just better glass. Documented, correctly scoped M1903 A4 snipers are among the most valuable Springfields in existence, regularly bringing $8,000 to $15,000 for verified examples. The M1917 Enfield deserves a mention too, since more American doughboys carried it into the First War than carried the Springfield. And it came right back for training duty, rear security, and lend-lease shipments in the Second. Clean examples today are surprisingly affordable at $700 to $1,200. A genuine value play for a rifle that armed more Americans than any other in 1918. And one more rifle almost nobody talks about, the M1941 Johnson, a semi-automatic with a rotary 10-round magazine that could actually be topped off mid-fight, something the Garand's fixed clip system could never do. Marine Raiders and Paramarines adopted it in the Pacific in limited numbers, and because total production was small and documented Raider association is rare, an original Johnson rifle in good condition now brings $4,000 to $7,000, with correct bayonet and sling adding to that figure. We're a good chunk into this list, and if you're the kind of person who wants to understand exactly what your grandfather or great-grandfather carried overseas, stick around because the heavy weapons are where this list gets serious, both historically and financially. Drop a comment right now with which branch your family served in during the war. I read every single one. Let's talk about the machine guns that gave American infantry squads their teeth and where transferable examples represent some of the largest dollar figures in this entire arsenal. The Browning automatic rifle, officially the M1918A2, was the backbone of every rifle squad, a .30-06 automatic firing between 300 and 650 rounds per minute out of a 20-round magazine at just over 19 pounds. John Browning designed it during the First World War, and it was still the best option a generation later because nothing had come along to replace it. A transferable BAR today is a genuine investment-grade firearm, commanding $40,000 to $60,000 depending on configuration and manufacturer. For sustained fire, you had the water-cooled M1917 A1 Browning, the heavyweight of the lineup, using water in its jacket to fire for hours without cooking off, essential for holding a defensive line. Transferable examples with the original water jacket and correct tripod bring $15,000 to $25,000. Its lighter cousin, the air-cooled M1919A4, became the true workhorse medium machine gun of the war, mounted on jeeps, half-tracks, tanks, and landing craft. Because so many were produced and later demilitarized, transferable A4s are actually one of the more accessible transferable machine guns on the market, typically $10,000 to $16,000. A variant called the M1919A6 bolted on a buttstock and bipod, an attempt to make a tripod weapon carryable by a single soldier, and transferable A6 examples run in a similar $12,000 to $18,000 range, slightly higher when the correct bipod and stock are original rather than reproduction. And then there's the gun that outlived every other weapon on this entire list, the M2HB Browning 50 caliber, nicknamed Ma Deuce. Designed in 1918, it remains in active United States service to this very day, making it the longest-serving weapon in the entire American military arsenal. And that continuous service record is exactly why transferable Ma Deuce guns are among the most expensive firearms an American civilian can legally own, regularly selling for $80,000 to $120,000 and climbing every year the supply shrinks further. Rounding out the machine gun category, the M1941 Johnson light machine gun paired with its rifle counterpart, and because so few survive in transferable form, confirmed examples have sold in the $30,000 to $45,000 range. Real money for a gun most Americans have never even heard of. Shotguns played a bigger role in this war than most people realize, and several of them carry serious collector premiums today. The Winchester Model 1897 trench gun carried a legacy from the previous war when Germany formally protested it as inhumane and tried to have it banned outright under international law. Correct World War II contract trench guns with bayonet lug and heat shield now bring $3,500 to $6,000, considerably more than a standard sporting Model 1897. Its successor, the Winchester Model 12, was hammerless, faster, and became the preferred close-quarters weapon for Marines fighting through the Pacific. Standard Model 12 trench configurations with correct military markings sell for $2,000 to $4,000 today. The Ithaca 37 brought something mechanically unique to the fight, loading and ejecting shells through the same port on the bottom of the receiver. Only around 1,422 went to military contract during the war, and that scarcity shows in the price, with documented military Ithaca 37s bringing $2,500 to $4,500. And the Stevens 520-30, with its distinctive humpback receiver, is the value play of the shotgun category, with clean military-marked examples still available for $800 to $1,500. Now let's get into the weapons that took on armor and fortified positions. The M1 bazooka was revolutionary, and an original transferable launcher in complete condition with correct sighting hardware now brings $8,000 to $15,000. The refined two-piece M9A1 version, engineered so paratroopers could break it down and jump with it, commands a similar $8,000 to $14,000 depending on completeness. The heavier ordnance pieces, the anti-tank guns and howitzers, largely trade in a completely different world of Class 3 and destructive device registration and complete, deactivated, or demilitarized examples of pieces like the 37mm M3 and the 105mm howitzers occasionally surface at specialty military vehicle and artillery auctions for anywhere from $20,000 into six figures depending on completeness, working order, and documented unit history. Though these transactions are rare enough that pricing is essentially whatever a serious collector and a willing seller agree to in the room. Mortars and their smaller components see steadier civilian collector activity. Complete deactivated 60mm and 81mm mortar tubes with correct base plates and bipods, sold as inert collector pieces, typically bring $1,500 to $4,000, depending on completeness and stamped unit markings. Grenades and demolitions rounded out the American infantryman's toolkit, and here the market is entirely in inert, deactivated training and display pieces, since live ordnance obviously has no place in any civilian collection. Inert Mark II pineapple grenades with correct markings sell for $75 to $200 in the collector market, while a complete, correctly marked inert Bangalore torpedo section is a much rarer find, bringing several $100s when properly documented as deactivated. Blades mattered too, even in an age of rifles and artillery, and this is a category where the numbers might surprise you. The Marine Corps' K-Bar Mark II is arguably the most famous fighting knife in American history, and an original war-dated example with correct maker stamp and leather sheath brings $300 to $800 today, with documented Pacific Theater provenance pushing higher. The M3 combat knife trades in a similar range, typically $250 to $500 for correct wartime production, and the Garand's own bayonet, cut down to 10 inches under the M1905E1 modification, sells for $150 to $400 depending on maker and condition, with the earlier full-length 16-inch sword bayonets bringing a notable premium at $500 to $900 for scarce original examples. And finally, the flamethrowers, the most feared weapons in close quarters Pacific combat. Complete, correctly deactivated M1A1 and M2-2 flamethrower units sold strictly as inert display pieces with the fuel and propellant systems rendered permanently safe, are genuinely rare in the collector market and bring $3,000 to $6,000 when they do surface, simply because so few survived intact after the war. That is the complete American arsenal of World War II, and every single one of them tells the same story now that it told then. That American manufacturing built something the rest of the world could never quite replicate, and collectors today are paying accordingly. If your grandfather or great-grandfather served, drop the branch in the theater in the comments. I want to see how many of these weapons this community has a direct connection to, and tell me if any of them are still sitting in your family safe right now. Hit subscribe if you want more deep dives like this one. Next week, I'm breaking down the German side of this same war, the weapons the American arsenal was actually built to beat, and one rifle in that lineup nearly changed the entire outcome. You do not want to miss it. Stay sharp and never forget what these men carried.